Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. I am your host, Ed Dentzel. Oh, it's been a good week for you. You know, it's so funny. You know, it's been nice the last few days here. It's a beautiful sunny day today. And I've told you that my parents are down here from Pennsylvania, and they'll be here till the end of March. And I would say that at least 3 times since they've gotten here, my dad says to me, "What's up with the weather down here? Why isn't it nice?" And I turned to him, and I think every time he said this to me, I turn to him and I say, do you think Florida is Hawaii? I don't know what my parents exactly expected when they came down here. They don't like it windy. I guess they expected it to be 75 degrees every day. They expected that it wasn't going to rain. This is Florida. It's not Nirvana. It's not Bali High. It's not heaven. And to contrast this with 95% of the rest of the United States, and that includes Hawaii, it's pretty nice. Even if you were to go south from here, even go further south down to Naples, or you go down the whole way to Miami, you know what? They have cold days too. They get wind. It rains. But it's certainly many times better than in Pennsylvania. I guess you could go down to the Keys if you really want to go south in Florida, and that's quite a long drive from here, where even I am. But it's just kind of funny. Dad just cracking the jokes. I know he's serious, but it is kind of funny that he gives me crap about Florida weather when they could be up there in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's amazing. If you have never been to Florida during the winter, and I've been here since October of 2011, you see all of these cars with license plates from the north. I was walking out to my car a couple nights ago from my parents' condo, and I was just looking at the cars in the parking lot. Not one license plate from Florida. At least, and I passed maybe 7 or 8 cars, two cars from Ontario, Canada. But there was Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. I think my parents' car was there, so there was Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. Obviously, people like this weather just fine. So it's just kind of funny. Now, granted, even if you were to go to Las Vegas now, being that I lived there for 13 years, it doesn't rain there in the winter, but you may get a little bit of snow, but it gets way colder than it gets here. It goes down to 20 in Las Vegas, if I'm remembering correctly. It gets bitterly cold, and you want to feel wind. January, February, March in Las Vegas, Southern Nevada is some of the windiest weather you're going to see in the United States. I'm just telling you. They're playing meteorologist today at the Dentzel Domain. Let's get into the show. I remind you can email me at edwarddentzel@reagan.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. I'm going to have to criticize my fellow conservatives today, so I'm going to brace you for that, but I want to cover a couple things first. Carly Fiorina, we know that Chris Christie has left the race, and now Carly Fiorina has suspended her campaign. I just want to talk a little bit about that. Has there ever been a candidate, man or woman, who performed so well in the debates going back to when, remember, she started out in the smaller debate back in August, did really well, just blew everybody away, got onto the big stage for a couple debates, and then because she couldn't get enough, her poll numbers wouldn't go up, she had to go back to the smaller debate, and now she's out. Has there ever been a person running for office, specifically the president, that did so well in those first couple debates and could not get any traction whatsoever? If you remember, going back to August once again, she won what people thought. She won that smaller debate. And even when she got to the big debate, and at that time there was still Scott Walker was still there. Of course, Donald Trump was there. All the guys who were still in it were there. And many people considered her the winner of that second debate, the first one that she would have been on the main stage. Just couldn't get anything going. Now, maybe part of it is the Donald Trump effect, just sucking the air out of the entire room. That's a little part of it. And that may be the reason that Rick Perry, Scott Walker, some of the others couldn't catch on. But being that Carly Fiorina is a woman, you would have thought it might be a little bit different from her, especially considering of all of the candidates, she went after Hillary Clinton more than anybody. And it was thought that was going to really work to her advantage, and it didn't. I think I have a couple reasons why. First, I don't know how, and I like Carly Fiorina. I said a lot of nice things about Carly Fiorina back then. Haven't talked about her recently, but back between August and November, I'm going to say, I said a lot of nice things about her, and they were all genuine. But you also notice that once in a while I brought up the point, I just don't know how conservative she is. Now, that didn't come up in any of the debates, and I didn't see anybody criticize her that way. Any of the other candidates, I should say. But there was quite a bit of information out there that showed that when she ran for, I keep forgetting, was it governor of California or was it senator from California? I think it was senator. That she did not run a conservative campaign. Now, I understand it's California. I get it. That state is a mess. Being run by Democrats. By the way, on a side note, if you ever want to know the reason I'm not a fan of term limits, it's because of California. Everybody thinks we get term limits, get some turnover, won't have these established politicians. Well, guess what state has term limits? California does. Has not helped their cause at all. Not one bit. They've had term limits for 20 years. Hasn't helped them at all. People just keep electing new horrible people. What are you going to do? Any case, when she ran in that campaign, she did not run a conservative campaign. She lost anyway. But she wasn't as pro-life as she made herself out to be in the Republican race for president, and there were some issues. I'm wondering if a lot of people knew that about her, and that was part of it. I think it could be. Because otherwise, she came across as being very genuine. But just scratching the surface with her, I think there were some questions that, I mean, if you were to take her at her word for how she ran in California, she would have been easily the most liberal of all of the presidential possibilities. Even more liberal than John Kasich, or is it, I've been listening to people, is it Kasich or Kasich? For some reason, I remember it being Kasich going way back. And like I said, I don't watch a lot of TV, but I've been watching a couple of videos. Kasich, I'm just going to keep saying Kasich, and if I'm mispronouncing it, I apologize. But she would have been even more liberal than John Kasich has come across the last 6 months. But suddenly she was far to the right, somewhere over in that area where Marco Rubio is, getting close to Ted Cruz territory. I don't know if that's who she really is. I don't know. And maybe it's good that she had to suspend her campaign, because maybe if she would have been successful, all of that would have eventually come out. And in the meantime, she would have been taking time away, money away from these guys who are being a lot, not that they're more conservative, but they're being a little bit more genuine. You can say a lot about Jeb Bush, but at least he's being genuine. I dislike him because he's being genuine, but at least he's being genuine. So I think part of it was that. And I think also part of it, could there be at least a little bit of that Sarah Palin kind of, I don't know what to call it, that I realize that Sarah Palin's been getting a lot of attention with Donald Trump recently. But it also occurs to me a lot of people have been turned off by Sarah Palin the last years for many good reasons. And it could be just a lot of people saw Carly Fiorina and said, are we doing this again? Right? And I think there's also a part of it that was, would we be paying any attention to Carly Fiorina if she was a guy, if it was Carl Fiorina? Would she be running? Would she be able to run? If she was a guy who ran for the Senate in California and lost and was kind of wishy-washy, not a conservative, would Carl Fiorina have any shot at raising money and getting onto the stage and running for president? Probably not. So there's that part of it too. I think that all of that put together is why it's Donald Trump. It's her probably not being as conservative as she sold herself. It was maybe the overestimation of her as a person, in the Sarah Palin effect, and also the idea that would she have any chance if she was just a guy? All of it put together. Can she run? Do I think that she's would she be capable in an elected office? Yes. I still don't know how conservative she is. Would she be capable in some cabinet position? Probably. And if I was Ted Cruz and I get the nomination and I win, I may give her might give her an interview for labor secretary or something like that. Maybe. But as president, running for president, I think there were just too many questions about her eventually. People loved what she said, but then it just didn't carry over. Just some doubts. I think there were doubts about Carly Fiorina. And then also on top of it, didn't help that while she was Hewlett-Packard, she seemed to have ticked a lot of people off. And as a CEO, sometimes that's what you have to do. But people don't, the truth is, it seems that there were more people ticked off at her for running Hewlett-Packard than you can find people who have worked for Donald Trump for the last 25 years in his corporations. That matters. As much as I may say bad things about Donald Trump, and I'm not saying all his employees are happy, but you go out there and you can find a lot more people who are distressed and disgusted with Carly Fiorina's stint as CEO than Donald Trump and his stint as the CEO and leader of his companies. I think that matters. So Carly Fiorina did a fine job. It just wasn't your time. Let's move on to something else. I was listening to a show yesterday, and it was on Red State Talk Radio. I'm not going to mention it. That's not what I do here. I'm not here to call people out. It's a fellow broadcaster on Red State Talk Radio. But I just want you to know how far it's gotten. And if I heard it on this show, then I'm guessing that this is something that's going on elsewhere, out there in talk radio land outside of Red State Talk Radio. And this is the exact reason why I don't get suckered into all this stuff about the establishment, the grassroots, the anti-establishment, because I realize that all of those terms, and being that I'm a writer, words are very important to me. When I'm writing a book, I write 3,000 words a day. So I'm using at least 3,000 words today, and that doesn't count all the words I write and then I erase them because I don't like it. It usually probably ends up being more like 3,500 words a day. So I know words have meanings, and I want to always make sure that when my readers are taking in what I write, I hope they understand it. So you never want to use words with double meanings and that could be confusing. So that's why I think I've never gotten caught up in establishment and all those different terms that get thrown around as if everybody knows what they mean, but the truth is everybody has a different definition of them. I actually heard somebody call Ted Cruz, this person said, Ted Cruz is part of the establishment. I actually heard that yesterday on Red State Talk Radio. And this is, I told you at the beginning of the show, I was probably going to make fun of my fellow conservatives today. Well, this is it. As I tweeted out yesterday, I tweeted out right after I heard this. And the tweet got some nice responses. I said, I actually heard somebody call Ted Cruz an establishment person today. You know, because nothing says establishment like shutting the government down. Now, do you see what I'm trying to tell you? Well, I've tried to tell all of you to stay away from that stuff. Establishment, that word means anything that the person saying it wants it to mean. If you're a Trump fan, then any other politician in the United States is part of the establishment. Do you believe that to be true? A first-term senator, a first-term congressman, a first-term governor, no matter how well they're doing or how badly they're doing, they're all part of the establishment now, and they all deserve to be thrown out, as if any of them have anything to do necessarily with what's going on right now. See, this is the problem I have with that. Granted, there's a lot of blame to go around. And we as conservatives, we deserve at least a little bit of it. But when you have, I know that there's more than just Ted Cruz out there who were fans of shutting the government down. You can't say that you're a person's establishment and he also shuts the government down and takes a very principled position on it against his other colleagues. And we know that there were others who went along with him on that. Likewise with subsidies, and we could go right down the line. At some point, wouldn't he in particular stop being part of the establishment? Wouldn't he? Eventually? It's disgusting. It disgusts me. It's the same way they typify Marco Rubio as being part of the establishment. Just because on one issue, he's a little wishy-washy. And who gets to decide what that means, the establishment? I don't know. See, when I think of the word establishment just outside of politics, and if you go to the dictionary, Webster's, a dictionary that was published 50 years ago before that word became part of the lexicon in politics, you'd find that it meant establishment would mean, first of all, it could also mean in a building. There's various definitions. But in the context of groups and society and people getting together, establishment would be seen as the leaders, and it's kind of like the people who are keeping others from getting ahead. Maybe if you want to put it in a negative connotation. I don't see how a first-term senator from Florida could be termed that. I don't see how a first-term senator from Texas could be given that title either. And I would, you know what? I'd say that for the Democrats who are first-termers too. That's what I would say. Now, if you want to start getting into John McCain, who's been in the Senate for a while, Bernie Sanders, who's been around forever, and a lot of other senators and congressmen, you want to call the governor of Iowa, who has been the governor for a record amount of time, part of the establishment, then I can maybe start understanding at least the definition of establishment is being used in the right way. But to call first-term congressmen, first-term senators, first-term governors establishment just because they ran, basically just because they ran for office. That's essentially what it comes down to. Anybody who's an elected official is part of the establishment. If you got elected yesterday, you're part of the establishment. 2 weeks ago, establishment. But if you're running and you're not a politician, then you're not a part of the establishment. And I guess that's why Donald Trump considers himself to be not a part of the establishment, even though we know he's been playing patty cake with lawmakers for decades. And those lawmakers are still there. I'll say it again. It's disgusting that any conservative could come out and say that some of these people are part of the establishment, even though they've only been in there for a few years. Well, they haven't fought Barack Obama enough. I've tried to tell you this regarding all of this. You look at conservativereview.com, you look at the Liberty rating for all of your senators, all of your Republican senators, all of your Republican representatives, and you know what they average out to? About a 60. 100 would be perfectly conservative. Your average Republican averages out to about a 60, 65. Now, if you're going to tell me we need more conservative leaders, I agree with you. But if that person gets elected and they have a Liberty score of 60, 65%, then I don't know how much you can expect. But it's the voters who elect them. They don't just thrust themselves into that office. They aren't committing coup d'etats to get into those positions. They get elected. And then they get elected again. And then elected again. Every 2 years, every 6 years. They're able to, the voters are able to speak. A lot of times, the voters, no matter how much they complain, they send these guys, these women back there. I don't know what to tell you. Shouldn't, at some point, the voters are at least a little to blame? I know that's not cool. But it can't always just be the politician's fault. He can only do, or she can only do, what the voters allow him or her to get away with. And calling somebody and a part of the establishment who's tried to shut the government down and done other things that are obviously anti-establishment, anti-government, is bizarre to me. But that's how far we've come. That's how we've, can I say this word, bastardized the language. We did it ourselves. But that's what Trump supporters, I guess, are trying to sell you. Any elected official in the United States right now is part of the establishment. No matter what they've done, no matter what their records are, no matter how conservative they are, no matter how liberal they are, that must be the answer. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I know that people are disgusted out there. There's a lot of resentment out there. But if Ted Cruz is part of the establishment, then every single person in any office in the United States is part of the establishment. And at that point, the word really doesn't mean anything anymore. It's just like that scene from The Incredibles when Dash is talking to his mother in the car about being special. And his mother says, well, everybody's special, Dash. Well, that's just another way of saying nobody is. Well, if everybody's part of the establishment, then there is no anti-establishment. But what you have to be cautious of, and this once again goes out to Trump supporters, is that every person, I guess, in a government is part of the establishment, but Donald Trump becomes elected, he will not be a part of the establishment. Boy, that's pretty convenient, isn't it? Isn't it? And therein you have what lies how cults get started. You know, and I've been thinking a lot about that. Actually, I was sent an email. I don't know if I want to talk about it right at this second because I have some other things I want to cover. But I sent an email to a friend of mine saying how Donald Trump could be defeated and where I think his weak spot is. But I don't want to get into that right at this second. But being that I heard somebody call Ted Cruz, I keep saying it that way, and it doesn't come right. Somebody says that Ted Cruz is part of the establishment is bizarre to me. Absolutely bizarre. If he's part of the establishment, then guess what? I guess Ronald Reagan was part of the establishment. Then I guess Calvin Coolidge was part of the establishment. I guess Newt Gingrich, he was part of the establishment too, don't you know? Jack Kemp, part of the establishment. Barry Goldwater, part of the establishment. Dwight Eisenhower, part of the establishment. What are you going to do? That's how bizarre this has all gotten. And that people can't see through this just shows you how people are so caught up in their own emotions and they aren't thinking clearly. Let's move on to something else. I talked to you yesterday or the day before about this question. Is Barack Obama, is he smart and doing these things on purpose, or is he just a nitwit? There's the Chris Christie line of thinking that Barack Obama got into a position where he's in over his head. And then there's more like the Marco Rubio now, I guess you could call it, people who think that he's doing exactly what he planned to do. And I've told you, I think that it's a mixture. I think that both of those sides have points. And I bring this up, this interview that Donald Trump, and this isn't, I'm going to tell you, it's not about Donald Trump for once. But he did this interview with Michael Savage, who I'm not a big fan of. And the issue of ISIS came up. And Donald Trump says, I don't even think he really wants to defeat ISIS. Now, within that statement, I think there is some truth. But how do you get to that truth? Because even with the topic of ISIS, you can see both sides of the argument. They're a part of it that you can see, like the Chris Christie side. Didn't completely understand what ISIS was when it started, calling it the JV team. And on the other hand, doesn't want to do anything to ISIS because, in my opinion, he doesn't want to get any soldiers killed. He doesn't want to get any American soldiers. He cares about ISIS, but he just doesn't care to the point where he has to stand there and meet victims' families with the coffins with the American flag draped over them and offer his sympathy. He doesn't want to do that. I'd also add that he doesn't want to do that because of who his constituents are. So even within a topic like that, it's not just simple to say that he doesn't want to defeat ISIS, in meaning he actually agrees with ISIS. Barack Obama does not agree with ISIS. I don't stand here to defend him. But we know that there have been various times that we have taken out some terrorist leaders. But the issue with Barack Obama, the way it seems like he doesn't want to defeat ISIS, it all has to do with the collateral damage. It has to do with sending men and women into combat and them getting killed and then him having to offer his condolences. That's different than him not understanding who ISIS is. But I got to go to the break. I want to continue to talk about this after this commercial break. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.
Real radio for real Americans. Red State Talk Radio.
This is Brigitte Gabrielle from actforamerica.org. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do not go to bed every night absolutely fatigued from trying to restore America from the destruction that is taking place, then you're simply not working hard enough. Arm yourself with knowledge so that you too can act for America by listening to Red State Talk Radio. Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. RedStateTalkRadio.com. Lock it in and rip off the knob.
I can't defend my family because I live in Chicago.
I am free to defend my family with my AR-15 or handgun because I live in Wyoming.
I can't even protect myself if I'm attacked because I live in D.C.
I carry my 9mm in my purse anywhere I go in Texas.
I can't protect my small retail shop here in Brooklyn.
We keep guns behind the counter at our shop in Oklahoma. Only had to show it once.
Do you see a pattern?
Demand equal gun rights in America. Go to SAF.org now.
My name is Courtney Luster. I'm 21, well-educated, and unemployed American. I happen to be black, so I'm in the highest unemployment segment of the population, black youth unemployment. Notice I don't refer to myself as African American because I'm an American first. I'm a proud American who happens to have black skin. So please explain to me where African American fits into that equation. You're right, it doesn't. For over 60 years, the Democrat Party has used my fellow black Americans to maintain power in the federal and state governments. Why do I say that? Because I read history. While many of my friends are watching mindless videos, I choose to listen to Red State Talk Radio. Why? Because I want to educate myself, not entertain myself. Red State Talk Radio, America's premier conservative talk radio network. Hey, all you black American youth, be a Frederick Douglass Republican, not an Al Sharpton race pimp. Educate yourself. Listen to RedStateTalkRadio.com.
This is Michael Cutler, retired senior special agent with the former INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. You should know that I'm also a lifelong Democrat, but ladies and gentlemen, the mainstream media has completely failed the American people. That's why, despite being a lifelong Democrat, I listen to Red State Talk Radio, the dominant force in conservative internet talk radio. Lock it in and rip off the knob.
We're back at the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio, and I want to continue to talk about this topic of Barack Obama. Is he a nitwit, or is this all planned destruction on his part? And once again, I think that the ISIS problem that we have is a perfect example. It started out as him not understanding. Once again, the issue was over his head. He looked at it, his advisors looked at it, and said, that's the JV team. Now, we don't know what the military people were telling him. Whatever it was, he ignored it. I'm going to guess that they were telling him something, and he ignored it once again because he was in over his head as president of the United States. So Chris Christie and his people, they think like that. They're right. But obviously, at some time, Barack Obama's opinion on ISIS changed. Now, he still won't call it radical Islam, but we know that we do have some assets over there that are trying to fight ISIS. But you notice, we don't have any boots on the ground. Now, see, that part of it is then the Marco Rubio part. That he perfectly understands what he's doing. He just doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do what it takes to defeat them because of this political reason and that political reason. So what Marco Rubio kept repeating over and over that eventually got him in trouble is kind of right as well. And that's why I told you on Monday or Tuesday that it's a little bit of both, and you just can't pick one or the other out. It's just not that simple. And I can remember, I remember the day I was listening when Rush Limbaugh back in 2008 said he hopes Barack Obama fails. I was listening to his show that day. Likewise, going into somewhere 2009, 2010, this is when that whole idea, is Barack Obama stupid or is this all planned, started. This is going to say, I'm going to say this was early 2010. I remember exactly where I was when I was listening to this. And, of course, Rush takes he knows exactly what he's doing back then. And I think that's the point, I guess, these days Rush is making now. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think what it is he's in over his head, which gets him in trouble. And then when he has all the knowledge, then the politics get in the way. Just like when it deals with the economy or immigration or anything else. That those things are planned, but I also think that they start in a place of naivete. Some of them. So it's bizarre to me when either people take either side. It's strange to me that they can't see elements of both in there. And it does matter. It does matter. Don't say that, well, we just can think one of those ways and we'll be just perfectly fine. If you need to understand somebody and you want to defeat somebody and you want to understand, because I'm not sure Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders are going to be any different. You have to know precisely how they think and why they think what they do. And I think part of the reason we as conservatives have failed is because I think that sometimes we only understand them 80% of the time. And the problem is we understand the other 20. We don't. We don't. Just like they don't understand us, they don't get us right all the time. You know what? We don't get them all the right all the time either. If we did, I think we would be more successful. And I think that entails accepting that they can make different decisions based on different information or just a lack of information. It's not always they're stupid or it's planned. It can be a mixture. Let's move on to something else. I've noticed, where do I want to go here? I'm looking at my notes as I talk to you. North Korea. Here, this is going to be from one into another, and it's going to be another crack on my fellow conservatives and how I think that our thinking has just gone totally off the rails. Just like if any of you conservatives out there are thinking that Ted Cruz is part of the establishment. But North Korea launched a satellite into orbit this past weekend. And I haven't talked about North Korea too much recently. I'm fascinated by North Korea. Fascinated by what that must be like to live there. The hell that those people live in. For example, the country sends athletes to the Olympics, and they're herded around like cattle. And then they go back to North Korea, and you hear these stories about if they didn't do well, they get sent to the gulags, and it's just a disaster of a country. And, if this was like the 1500s, you can understand why a country like that might exist. A territory somewhere might exist. Without telephones, without communication, without the internet, without airplanes, just some little isolated piece of land somewhere that nobody's run into yet, no Western civilization has found yet. You can understand how something like that might exist. That it still exists in the 21st century is about as bizarre as you can get in the history of civilization, from my point of view. But they launched a satellite, and I read where it, not long after the Super Bowl was over, it flew almost right over, and it's about, is it 300 kilometers or 300 miles up? I forget what the distance is. But it almost flew right over it. Doesn't seem to be any radio signals coming from it, although North Korea will tell you there is. And this is the second satellite they've managed to get into orbit. But the other one, I don't think it does anything either. They might have just launched a rock into space. Not a rocket, but a rock into space. It's just things flying around the Earth that has North Korea's stamp on them. They just don't do anything. But Donald Trump was asked about North Korea and what he'd do as president. And he said that he would, I'm going to use the words, blackmail, he didn't use that word, I am, the Chinese into taking Kim Jong-un out and getting that country straight and fixing that country. And if they didn't want to do it, he would use the United States' economic power to force them to do that. I'm not going to go into the specifics of that. That's just not that's just not going to happen. And this comes from a guy, me, who has said in the past that to fix North Korea is going to take a joint United States, China, Russia, South Korea. It's going to be a consortium, Japan too, to make North Korea go away. That's what it's going to take. And each of their economic mights and their militaries and their other abilities, diplomacies, their abilities to be diplomats, it's all going to have to work if we bring North Korea to an end. And that's quite a different way of thinking than what Donald Trump thinks. Mm-hmm. The reason that North Korea is the way it is because China wants it that way. If China was bothered by North Korea, it would do something. I've told you the reasons that China does not do anything about North Korea. First of all, China has problems of its own, mainly with its economy now. But it has unrest as well. Second of all, they know if they do anything to North Korea, all those people are going to do nothing but try to break into China. And these people have no money. They don't know how the outside world works. China doesn't want to get into that. It's going to be a big pain in their butt, and there's no amount of money that I think that we can force China to do this on their own. If they're going to do it, it should be in conjunction with us, not because we force them to do it. Forcing China to do something, that's how bullets start flying. Right? That's how World War II got started. World War II, well, at least dragging the United States, it was all, if you don't realize, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, because of what? Because of oil. We didn't like what they were doing. We cut them off. And what they want to do, they were expanding into China. We cut them off. We cut their oil supplies off. And they came and bombed us. That's generally how it worked. Now, in retrospect, maybe we should have done something else with Japan instead of costing all those lives. Granted, the United States probably would have gotten into the war eventually anyway. But we tried it the forceful way back then. We know what happened. Are we going to try to do that the forceful way now, trying to blackmail some other country to do what we want? In a very dangerous situation with North Korea that has a huge military. All the people there are kooks and freaks. I don't know how anybody in China or the United States thinks that's ever going to work. It would be a complete disaster. China taking out Kim Jong-un, what are they going to do? Sneak in there? China's going to be our whipping boy? That's not going to happen. But that's the way Donald Trump thinks. But I want to take you to the next point that is also a kooky idea, but it's conservatives, it seems, are jumping. Now, I don't hear any conservatives jumping on to Donald Trump's attitude toward North Korea. However, I have seen the last couple of days, a lot of conservatives jumping on this idea that, yes, we can get Mexico to pay for the wall that we want to build between the United States and Mexico. And it has to do, and this comes from a site called The Last Refuge, which is a conservative site that I don't think I've ever been to before. But this passes for deep conservative thought now. Their solution there is to seize the remittances. And if you don't know what a remittance is, that means all these illegals in the United States from Mexico and elsewhere. What they do is they send their money back to Mexico. And it ends up being like $24 billion. In fact, that's what they believe it is. Studies have been done, I guess. That's as much money as Mexico makes from its oil industry. You should know that the GDP of Mexico is about $1.2 trillion. All right? So $24 billion is not that much. It's a bit, but it's a very small slice of their overall GDP. But those remittances would, I guess you could say, would be considered to be part of their GDP. So all these illegals here, they make money illegal ways, working here, off the books or whatever. They take that money electronically, they send it back to Mexico. Well, the idea is, we're just going to stop that. And the belief that the reason we think we can do that is because of, I guess we have laws against sending remittances to Cuba. So Cubans come here, they try to send money back to Cuba. We don't allow that. Well, aren't Cuba and Mexico different? I know we're not big fans of Mexico right now. But surely Cuba as a country and Mexico as a country are different situations. Like it or not, Mexico is actually an ally of ours. Cuba is not, despite us opening up relations with them again. First of all, just off the top. So that's why it's not like Cuba at all. Second of all, the Cubans are here because they were political prisoners. They're here much more legally than those Mexicans are. Second of all, that also makes the situations different. But the most important point of all of this is that it's not like those illegals aren't going to know what the government's going to do. Those illegals are sending that money back to Mexico, and then they hear, you know what, starting January 1st, 2017, the government's going to start seizing all the money. Guess what those illegals are going to do? They're going to find other ways to send their money back to Mexico instead of the ways that can be stopped. Just to the point of getting the cash, putting it in an envelope, slipping it in the mailbox, and mailing it to Mexico. Instead of doing it electronically, which I guess is what most of them do now. They're not going to stop it just because the government tries to stop it. They'll just find other ways of doing it. On top of that, I could have sworn that Donald Trump's point is, I'm going to become president, I'm going to send all these illegals back to Mexico. Well, if you send them all back, then there's no illegals to send remittances back to Mexico, right? So you can't seize their money. Because they're all back in Mexico now. Or, I got to ask you, Are you going to start seizing the money of legal Mexicans who live here, who are sending money back to Mexico? I wonder if that's what we're going to get to next. People who have gotten in here legally, whether they've become citizens or what, they still send money back to Mexico. Are you going to seize their money? Whatever happened to private property in this country? I thought we were allowed to send our money wherever we want. I understand we can't send it to Cuba or Iran or North Korea, but so you're saying millions of Americans go to Mexico on vacation, but you're saying legal American citizens can't send their money to Mexico to somebody they know? Really? But this passes for deep conservative thought in the year 2016. Right? If you send all the legals back, then I guess there's going to be no money to build that wall. And we Americans are going to have to build it. And I have nothing against that. And that's the other point that I want to make regarding all this, thinking that Mexico is going to build a wall to keep their people from coming into the United States. What do you think that's going to do for the Mexican government? To me, that sounds a lot like what East Germany did in building a wall to keep its people in. All right? Doesn't it? And we know how that worked out. But East Germany, Soviet satellite country, watching every people, iron fist. Mexico, not a great country, kind of a drug cartel country. But if a government builds a wall, and they're paying for it because we've blackmailed them, what do you think that's going to do to the country of Mexico? You think it has problems now, it'll go through 1,000-fold. And I know we're not supposed to care about that. I know. But we should. And see, to me, there's a psychological difference between Mexico building a wall that they're paying for to keep their people in contrast to the United States building a wall on our soil built by Americans to keep their people out. It's still a wall. It's still on U.S. soil, but there is a psychological difference. Whereas the Mexicans can look at the United States, yeah, we know why they're building that wall. We hate it. We don't like it, but that's what they're going to do. We can't stop them. They're going to do with their money what they want. But if their own country does it, it's just different. It's just different. And dare I say, going back to the East German example, had West Germany or West Berlin built a wall on West Berlin soil to keep the East Germans out, you know what? It would have been a lot more successful. I'm not saying they wanted to do that. But they'd have much more of motivation, those guys on the wall, keeping those East Germans out, than East Germany building a wall and having East Germans man it. Because you know what? A lot of those East German soldiers are thinking, you know what? I don't want to be here either. See, there's a psychological element to this that I think is also being discounted here. There's an economic one. The illegals can't send remittances back if there's no illegals anymore. So I guess there's no money to build that wall. All right? Not to mention, they'll find other ways to send the money back if they're still here. But there's also a psychological element in taking ownership of an issue and making sure that it's done right. And everybody understands that we, the United States, can do this ourselves, that we don't have to blackmail somebody else to do it. We have to do it ourselves if it's truly going to work. Any other way is going to cause complete chaos, more problems than we have even now. But I've come to the end of the show. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio. You can find my books at Amazon.com. You can go to EdwardDentzel.com. EdwardDentzel.com/book is where you can download the first chapter of my next novel, The Comebacks. You can find my shows at Podbean, SoundCloud, Podomatic now, YouTube. You can join me at Facebook, LinkedIn. Email me at EdwardDentzel.com. My Twitter feed is Dentzel Domain, all one word, no space in between. Good night. You've been listening to the Dentzel Domain on Red State Talk Radio.